this week, Google just announced some major AI updates. And this includes an AI makeover of search that everybody is talking about. So, Google had its I/O Developers Conference and announced a slew of updates related to AI across different products and developments that it has made on its own models. So, some of the most important updates, and there are quite a few of them, so definitely check out the show notes to go through the whole list. But the ones that jumped out as really important include they announced a new next generation large language model called Palm 2. And they say that Palm 2 excels at advanced reasoning tasks, including code and math, classification and question answering, translation, and multilingual proficiency. And it's better than our previous state of the art large language models. Google also announced an AI makeover of search through what they're calling their search generative experience. So this will essentially deliver conversational results like a chat GPT right in Google's core search engine. And this is going to be available to users who sign up to Google's Search Labs sandbox. Again, that link is in the show notes. Some other really notable updates, there are new AI writing tools for Gmail where it will write emails for you. Google has removed the waitlist for Bard, its kind of experimental conversational AI engine. And you will now have the ability to use AI to generate full documents, slides, and fill in spreadsheets automatically across tools like Docs, Slides, and Sheets. So this was such a huge announcement, Paul. I mean, there's been a ton of speculation that Google has fallen behind lately in the AI race with companies like Microsoft, OpenAI, et cetera. But these announcements certainly seem quite the opposite of that. Not only is Google back in the game, but they appear to be in quite a strong position here. Can you unpack the significance of the latest round of these announcements from Google?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this, and we've talked about this on the show quite a number of times. That listen, there probably isn't a more advanced organization in the world from a perspective of AI than Google, and that is pretty widely known. I would say. I mean, obviously, there's major players like Meta, and it is still not talked about enough with what they're doing, and Jan LeCun and that team. Microsoft's been doing this stuff for 20 years. Amazon's been a major player. Baidu, Nvidia, like there's a lot of major players, and obviously OpenAI gets a ton of press. Um, what what sort of jumped out to me on this event was there seems to now be a willingness on Google's part to do things they weren't willing to do before. So they have obviously a massive um, uh, lead in digital ads and search in particular. And there's been no motivation on their part to disrupt that. So then when Microsoft and OpenAI show up and start kind of rattling the cage, Google has to sort of look themselves in the mirror and say, are we willing to now do things we wouldn't have done before, like cannibalize their own business? And what we've been waiting on is would they be willing to do that? And I think that's been the big question in everyone's mind, certainly in investors' minds. And so I started thinking last week, and I think I might have got asked about this on a different podcast. And so I made a quick list of like the things that Google has going in its favor that these announcements sort of start leading into, and that I'd be a little worried about if I was the competition. So first, they have the people. They have over 2,000 AI ML employees. Um, Now they have lost a lot of top talent. People like Aiden Gomez went on to found Cohere, and I think was it Noam Brown that went on to find Character.ai. Like some of the people who were core to the innovation in the last like 5, 6 years in generative AI and in language models in Google have left to do their own thing. And in part, it seems like some of those top people left because they couldn't commercialize their own technology. So certainly, there's entrepreneurial spirit. People are going to leave and go build their own thing. That's going to happen all the time. But you just don't hear about that at like Apple. Like you don't hear about high profile people leaving Apple as much. So it seemed like it was a little bit more of an issue here. Um, but because they weren't really willing to commercialize what they had. They have these two major research labs, which are now a single AI research lab, and they're working on all this stuff. And so imagine you're one of the top AI researchers in the world, and you're inventing the transformer architecture, and you're doing all these things, and it's like they never see the light of day. I would imagine that becomes a bit demoralizing or challenging. And so to work in a company where the things you build can actually, see the consumer end, is probably a little bit more interesting. I would guess. Again, I'm not a researcher. I'm just sort of theorizing here. And so I think if they're willing to now actually start putting these innovations out into the market, maybe you slow down that talent leak and you can actually really recruit the best people in the world. So they have people. They have 20 plus years of AI research. OpenAI was created in 2016, so I mean it's newer. They have the data centers and the compute power, which almost no one has. OpenAI relies on Microsoft for it. It's why they sold a third of the company for $10 billion. They had to have access to compute power. So Google has that. They have their own chips that were purpose built for AI, for machine learning, called TPUs, tensor processing units. So the industry was powered by GPUs, which are made by NVIDIA. Um, Google built their own TPUs for more advanced and kind of customized versions of AI. So they have their own chips. They have Google DeepMind and Demis Hassabis, who we've talked about on the show before. So they have, again, a decade plus of advanced research into some of the frontiers of where AI is going. They have 115 billion in cash, according to their most recent earnings call. They have 93% market share of the search market, and they have over 6 million Google Workspace business customers, which is more than 50% of the Office suite market. So if you stack all this up and they actually have AI as advanced or better than OpenAI, OpenAI doesn't have any of that stuff. Microsoft doesn't have any of that stuff. So I just look at it and say, if if the end game here is actually artificial general intelligence, which I believe it to be, both from having conversations from people at Google who are working on AI and from everything we hear in the industry, is the belief that this is where we're trying to go. It's what Demis Hassabis and DeepMind were, what he created it for, him and Shane Legg and their co-founders, is to achieve AGI. Well, AGI is trillions in market cap. So if you can build a machine that's super intelligent or superhuman at multiple capabilities, at many tasks, the value you can unlock is massive. And so if they think that there is a viable path to AGI and that they're looking at potentially trillions in market cap, then they may be willing to do things to their ad business and their search business that we're not thinking about, or that the average analyst would look at them and say, "Oh, there's no way they'd cannibalize their ad business." Well, maybe they would if the alternative is $1 trillion market. So I don't know. I think that um, they may be willing to do some things here that most people don't think they're going to be willing to do. And I think that, it's kind of just like that. You poke the bear and the bear is like ready to go now. And I don't know. Like I'm very bullish on Google. I think that the biggest roadblock, honestly, may be regulatory.
Mm.
Like that if they do start heading down this path, I think part of their concerns was that they were going, if they release things that don't work as well or that do harm, that they were worried that regulators were going to come after them. And I don't know if maybe they think that because everybody's doing it now, there's more cover for them and they're not going to get, isolated in that. But I do see the regulator being a potential issue. But overall, I don't know. A couple of quick thoughts. So that's like kind of my macro level thoughts. My other thought is looking at the search, massively disruptive. I've
Mm.
talked with a number of people in the last week, more expert on search than I am. And it seems pretty universal. If no one has a clue what this is going to do, but it sure seems like it's going to be a massive disruption to SEO and content publishing for brands. And, because the big question basically becomes, well, if I get the answer right there, what do I need to go to the publisher for? And if
Mm.
I, over time, don't need to go to the publisher as much, then what is the motivation of the publisher to publish anything? So I give you a quick example. I used Bard. So the Bard, the Palm 2 you mentioned, the new language model is powering Bard now, and anybody can go get it. It's just bard.google.com. So you said there's no wait list, nothing. You can turn it on. Now I will say you can turn it on for your personal Gmail, but if you're a Google Workspace business, your administrator actually has to go in and turn on, there's an early access for apps. You have to go in and turn that on and then give some data permissions. So if you have a corporate account that's using Google Workspace, or if you're the administrator of one of those accounts, you have to go in and make an adjustment. I'll put in the show notes a link for how to do that. But anyway, so once you go in and turn it on, you can actually start to experiment with Bard. And so I did one because it is connected to the internet, unlike OpenAI's ChatGPT out of the box. So I did one that asked it about our conference. So I said, like, tell me about the marketing ad conference, and it did it. It had the right dates, right location, right everything. I did ask it one where, and it was pretty much everything I needed. I could still go to the event site, but it didn't list it. And then I asked it one where I wasn't, I was like, okay, let me see if it actually cites things. And so I asked it, what is the law of uneven AI distribution? Now, if anybody listens to the show, they've heard us talk about this. I wrote it in probably March. So it's fresh, it's original. Like, I knew there was nowhere else on the internet that would have talked about it yet. So I put it in and it did like a 400-word summary of the law of uneven distribution that I wouldn't have needed to go anywhere else. Like, it was
Mm.
everything I needed, but it did actually have citations at the bottom that went back to our blog. So I don't know. I mean, I think that it's going to change dramatically. Bard was interesting, not nearly as creative as GPT-4. So I haven't pushed this thing through the limits like, the Twitter thread people who, jumped on this thing and ran 50 use cases through it. But I ran like 5 or 6 use cases through Bard. And yeah, it's nowhere near as creative. I gave it the same out of office prompt that I've talked about. I gave GPT-4 and it was like really dry. And I said, can you make this more humorous? And it gave me another output. I was like, that's not funny. Like, try, can you make this funny? And it's like, I'm just a language model. Funny is subjective. I'm like, no, it's actually not very creative or funny. Um, so yeah, but then I gave it, like, my family's going on a trip to Rimini, Italy, create a recommended destination, and it did with a day-to-day itinerary. Like,
Mm.
it was really good. I asked it to summarize mentions of AI during the most recent HubSpot earnings reports, and it gave me a summary from, I don't know, it was like February, and I was like, "Isn't there a more recent one?" And it came back and said, "Oh yes, there's a more recent one from May," and then it gave it to me, and then I actually asked it, like, "What is this one was fascinating." It was like, what advantage does Google have over Microsoft and OpenAI in, the race for building generative AI technologies? And it gave a really good analysis that was actually kind of on point. And then I kind of kept drilling it. So I don't know. I guess overall, massive impact on search. Once this stuff gets infused into Google Workspace, so it's in Sheets and Docs and Slides, it's going to be really interesting. I think it's going to be not as impressive as the demos. I
Mm.
think it's going to be a little bit of a learning curve, but I do think turning this stuff loose on the world when knowledge workers have no real training for it and everybody in the organization all of a sudden has these tools, it's going to be game changing and we're not ready for it. We're
Yes.
getting close to ready, but as a society, we're not ready for it.
Wow. Yeah, that's an awesome analysis. That's really helpful to kind of cut through all the information and noise out there about this.
But there was like 25 products announced. So
Yes.
again, Mike and I are just hitting the basics, what we see as the high level. But yeah, I mean, go read the stuff, go look at some of the deeper analysis of some of the specific tools because it was a lot to process.